Well, God bless everybody. Thank you for joining my channel. Debbie here. It's good to be back on my channel. I haven't been on. I've been putting music on. I've been putting Hug and the Embracers, and Hug is my only brother. I've put Darlene and Rick Johnson on, my sister and my brother-in-law, and Rachel Starr. And I hope you've enjoyed it all. I won't be taping a Hug and the Embracers again till about August. So I've made everyone a playlist, and this summer you can listen to them on your playlist. But it's time to get back to my sermonettes. And when I was on before, we were talking about the book of Revelations, and we had discussed the seals, the trumpets, and the vials. And tonight, I feel like I want to talk about the woes. Now, the woes were in the seventh trumpet, and there were 3 of them. 7 trumpets, but 3 of those were woes. And the last trumpet, which is a woe, brings in the 7 vials. And the vials could be called bowls. And this is judgment. This is the worst judgment that's ever come upon the earth. And it's the final, it's the end of the Great Tribulation. This is judgment like the earth has never known. And these are called woes. Now, anytime you see the word woe, it means it's very important. It's very serious. And again, I had spoken to you about Satan getting kicked out of heaven for the second time, and he becomes earthbound, and the angels cry out loud, "Woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, for Satan has come down to you." Anytime you see woes, it's serious, very serious. But today I'm going to talk to you about some woes that's in the New Testament, which is in Matthew. And these woes don't mean judgment. They are warnings. And these woes came straight from Jesus, straight to the scribes and the Pharisees. He went straight to them, identified who they were, and called them hypocrites. And he gave them some woes. But before we go into those woes, I want to take you in your King James Bible to John 3:16 and 17. And we all know the verse, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but shall have everlasting life." But the next verse is a verse that I want you to really look at. It says, "For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved." And I want you to remember the word condemned, because when we turn to the woes, if you want to turn to the woes, go to Matthew and go to Matthew 23. And it starts in verse 13. Now, I can't read all of this to you because it would make too long of a video, but you can take the time to read it. If you go to Matthew 13, Jesus says, he calls them out. He says it straight to their faces. He calls them out, and he says, "You scribes and you Pharisees." But first he says, "Woe unto you, you scribes and you Pharisees." And he says, "Hypocrites." Now, all of us have met a hypocrite, and a lot of people won't go to church because they feel like there's too many hypocrites there. A hypocrite is a person that says they're this way, but they're really not this way at all. There's something other than what they say. And Jesus called the scribes and Pharisees hypocrites. And what he's got to say to each one of them is, with the woe, how important this message is. If you look at the first woe, it says, "For ye shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For ye neither go in yourselves, neither suffer ye them that are entering to go in." You know, there's a lot of religions out there that expect you to look different, act different, dress different. They make all these rules and regulations for you, and sometimes they make them so difficult and they become a burden, and you feel heavy laden because of all their rules. You'll find that in a lot of the churches, in the Jewish religion, okay, the Torah. The men will sit in rooms and read the Torah all day long while their wives go out to work. Jesus does not approve of religious organizations, religious men, traditional religious men, giving all these rules to people to put them under condemnation. Now, the next woe, and again, he identified them, called them scribes and Pharisees, and once again, to their faces, he called them hypocrites. He says, "For ye devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayer." Now, you know, many times there are church organizations, if a woman becomes a widow, they're right at the house right away, because they want to get her will, they want to get her property, they want to get her assets, they want to get her deed, and they put the woman under financial burden. But Jesus said not to do this. He said the church should help the widow and help her children. And this is a woe. And again, woes are serious business with God. We go to the next woe, and I'm breaking this down because you're going to have to read it yourself. And I'll just tell you a little bit about the next woe. It's about when ministers or priests or religious organizations constantly preach money. And we see a lot of that in television ministries. Well, if you send $50 or $100, you'll receive your blessing. Or if you seed this much money, or if you tithe this much money, God's going to give this back to you and you'll be healed. That's a sin. God does not approve of that. He says there's more serious matters than begging for money. And if you read on down, he tells you there's other matters, such as judgment, the law, mercy, faith, salvation. God expects people that say they stand for him not to beg for money. Not to beg for money. And he calls you a hypocrite. He doesn't cut any corners. If you go to the next woe, again, he identifies them, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. He says, you clean out the outside. You look so holy. You look so righteous. You do long prayers. You sing in another language. But you're not good. You're not cleaned up inside. And we've seen that in the Catholic Church, where priests have been arrested for what they did to the choir boys. I've seen priests, and where I live, that took money from the church and took it to the gambling casino. You see, you need to practice what you preach. Don't tell others, you need to do this and you need to do that, and put the people under terrible condemnation, terrible burden, when you don't live that way yourself. Now, there's another woe that you will find, and it's the one where the best way I can describe it is sometimes if you go into certain cathedrals, certain temples, certain places, you'll see like St. Paul up on the wall. You'll see Peter, St. Peter, and the people that we talk about in the New Testament when Jesus was here, the apostles and the disciples, and they actually pray over these people. They do ceremonies over these people. They do their rosaries, and Jesus does not approve this, and he calls them hypocrites, because if you look at the church that they're in, the organization that they're in, and everything they stand for, and you go back years prior, you'll find, and Jesus tells us, you killed the prophets. You killed these men, and now you put them on the walls and you worship them. He calls you hypocrites. But he says a little more than just calling these kind of traditional religious people that have a formality of God. He calls them serpents. And you find that in verse 33. He says, ye serpents. Serpents, ye generation of vipers. A viper is a snake. How can ye escape the damnation of hell? Now these are warnings. These are woes. There's about 7 of them. And they're the woes of Jesus. Gave these woes out to these important religious figures who thought they were so important. They wouldn't walk away from their position and follow Jesus because they enjoyed where they were. They were comfortable where they were, and they controlled and put power over other people by putting condemnation on them and burden on them. You know, let's turn to, in our King James Bible, to Matthew 11, verses 28, 29, and 30. I think this sums it up, what I'm trying to say. If you look at 20, it says, Jesus says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden. God doesn't want religious people that in authority in the church, to put burden on other people. He says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. The next verse says, come unto me, all ye that labor, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. You know, a yoke is a heavy thing. You know, if you have some kind of mule or work animal in the field, they put a yoke around them, and it's heavy. He says, take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your soul. His yoke is easy. His yoke is light. It's not heavy. For my yoke is easy, in the next verse, and my burden is light. When Jesus came to the earth, he presented the gospel a certain way, and he wasn't happy. He was not happy with the religious leaders of that time, what they did to the people. And even today, down through the generations, that's never changed. I was sitting in the hotel the other day, and I work in a hotel, and there must have been a minister there, and he forgot a book. And it was in the Lost and Found, and I picked the book up, and I said I had to look in that book and read it. And I was reading a paragraph, and it was so difficult. And I'm not the smartest branch on the tree, but not the dumbest branch either. But I read that paragraph, and I read it, and I read it, and it just wouldn't get to the main subject. It just kept you going. It wouldn't get to the main subject, and it was difficult to understand. And I thought about Jesus. When he stood before the people in the crowds, they just got bigger and bigger, these crowds. People couldn't get enough of what he had to say. They just drew unto him. And you know, when he spoke, He spoke on a level that every person could understand. Whether you were the smartest person or not so smart or not so fortunate or very fortunate. But he didn't make it difficult. He didn't make it hard to understand, because he wanted the gospel and what he's got to offer and what he's trying to say is he's given it to every human being. And he's doing it in a level where everyone understands. It's man that makes everything hard, burdensome, difficult, and heavy. And Jesus does not approve. And he gave them fair warning. And that warning wasn't just given to these scribes and Pharisees, but to every scribe and Pharisee and every generation. And even today, you see it everywhere. And people do walk away from heaven and from the Word of God because of these kind of people. I want to invite you to find Jesus this evening. It's not difficult. He made it easy. And most of all, he made it free. Churches want money. They want money. They preach money, money, money. But what Jesus has to offer to you is free. Salvation is free. Healing is free. Jesus doesn't charge you. And if you just are by yourself in your private place, you can bow your head and quietly admit to him that you're a sinner and ask him to forgive you of all your sins. There's no sin that he will not forgive. He will forgive you, and then tell him you believe he is the Son of God. Tell him you believe he died for you and arose for you and that he is coming back. All it takes is that prayer, because we walk by faith. And he writes your name down in the Lamb's Book of Life, and he covers your soul with his blood. And when he looks at you from now on, he doesn't see your sin. He sees you through the blood. And you're forever his. No one can take that away from you. I would like to invite you to find Jesus. Maybe you have met hypocrites. Maybe you have been in this kind of denomination that puts you under the hammer. Maybe you just said, I can't do it. But Jesus says, come to me and I will give you rest. God bless you, and I hope you make the right decision today. God bless.